And welcome back, Tiger fans, to Rock M Radio's football podcast, Before the Box Score. I am not Nate Edwards. I am Josh Matejka filling in for Mr. Edwards, who's getting some well-deserved time off after the football season. That, on the other hand, is Jaden Lewis. He's one half of our incredible Beat Boys team, giving him the day off from thinking about the woeful Mizzou hoops season. Jaden, how you doing today, my man?
I'm doing great. I can't complain whatsoever. It's been a fun past few months and, a lot more to come to. So I'm doing good. I'm doing good right now.
Good. I'm glad to hear it, man. Yeah, it's been obviously we've been kind of luxuriating in what was a really special Mizzou football season. One of, I guess, the 5-10 best seasons ever, and definitely one of the best seasons in the 21st century. And now we're just, walking through a sleepy, uneventful off season. Nothing of note has happened. It's just been all roses and thinking about the past. Of course, that's not true. Just, I think, 15 days after signing extensions for both Blake Baker and Kirby Moore. Obviously, the big news this week was that Blake Baker is leaving Mizzou football to take the defensive coordinator job at LSU. He'll be rejoining the coach that declined to retain him from the previous staff, Brian Kelly, and he is now, I assume he's put pen to paper at this point, is now the nation's highest paid assistant coach, $2.5 million. And reportedly, Mizzou was willing to at least get close to that. And we'll talk about that here in a second. Jaden, walk me through what you were thinking when you first heard the rumors that, because it started, I think, on over the weekend, it was reported that, LSU had kind of targeted Baker as its number one candidate. What were you thinking when you heard that first reporting?
Well, I thought it was kind of more, is smoke the right word? Because I'm like, I've never seen a coach, or I don't remember one that signs an extension and then a few weeks later he's leaving. So I was like, this is just rumor. He was at LSU before. So, of course he's a leading candidate, Mizzou, with the season they had. But then when it started picking up steam and picking up more steam, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's going to happen. And of course it did happen. So it was shocking to me, especially because him and Kirby Moore both signed the extension. So I'm going into this offseason that they're both going to be back. We don't have to worry about them leaving, but he ends up leaving and he's gone back to Louisiana. And I understand from, a Mizzou fan standpoint, you kind of have a little betrayal there, but then you look more into why he's possibly going back to LSU and you can kind of understand. So I'm shocked, but then when you kind of look into it, why he's going back, I'm not really surprised at all. I'm more shocked at the part that he signed an extension here and then, he's going back to the place that didn't retain him a couple years ago with that regime.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, frankly, I think that's the part of this conversation, specifically the Blake Baker leaving part of the conversation that a lot of people have been caught up on. And really, it all comes down to the fact that to me, it's not so much that he signed the extension, because I feel like we have precedent for college football coaches saying one thing and then just doing another thing. Or, Eli Drinkwitz, even look at him, right? He coached one season at App State, won the Sun Belt, was talking about the future, and then immediately jetted. I mean, extensions are extensions. It's all about just however much buyout cash you got on hand. I think the thing that people were so caught up on, weirdly enough, was the tweet that Baker put out the day that he signed the extension of, the Leo DiCaprio in The Wolf of Wall Street, "I'm not leaving" speech, which, that's bound to get people fired up whenever it happens. It's an annual occurrence for coaches and players. Yeah, right. And so who would have ever thought that tweeting would get someone in trouble? But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think even within our staff, we've had a lot of different opinions. I think a lot of people are where you're at. It's hard to fault him for turning down being the top paid assistant coach in the country. Obviously, he's got family in the area. He went to Tulane, so he's familiar with the landscape. And he had earned another great opportunity. It was just a matter of whether he was going to take it coming from Mizzou or going to a place bigger and being the next defensive coordinator there. Obviously, he wants to be a head coach. He said that before. I think Sam had a really interesting take on it in the pour over on Sunday when he mentioned that this makes a lot of sense in the old college football world because the conversation has been, he's going back home, his family's from there, it's great opportunity for them, but he might be leaving there again in 2 to 3 years. Home is a temporary state in college football. I think really the thing that got him in most trouble with Mizzou fans, and certainly there are people, I think it's pretty split. People that are happy for him, sad to see him go, but happy for him, and people who are like, he's a traitor. How dare he? This was snake-like behavior. I think really the trouble is that he got so exuberant about the fact that he was staying, only to turn around and take the job later. And he had to have known that he was a candidate. So you can look at it as a matter, he signed the extension to kind of put some pressure on LSU to up the ante a little bit. Personally, I'm not as interested in that part of the conversation. It's kind of something you can't control. But I do think it's interesting that the thing that got him in most trouble was he tweeted. The lesson from the beginning of Twitter has been to never tweet, and he didn't follow it.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing. We all know how Twitter is. But like you said, that's home to him. And like you said, home's temporary, but I don't think a lot of, especially if you have an opportunity to go back home and help rebuild something, because LSU's defense was not good last year. And if he rebuilds that, back at his home, then that's going to mean a lot to him and his family. I mean, we could debate Missouri or Louisiana, which state is better, but but what an amazing job that he did here. I remember that defense in 2021. I think it was after the Boston College game. I was like, man, they are in trouble because they could not stop the run. And then Tennessee came in the next week and we saw what happened then. And I don't think Steve Wilkes isn't a bad coach. I don't think he was. It was just, I think he's more of an NFL fit. But Blake Baker came in here and turned that defense around in 2022, which became the strength of the team. And then in 2023, probably the best season you've had and probably since 2013, 2007. So, I want people to realize, especially the ones that were like, oh, you betrayed us. He did a great job here, especially at Mizzou. So I think a lot should be celebrated for what he did. The players, of course, came out and, they're like defending him and having his back in. It's college football. It's football. It's a tough business. So these things happen all the time. If you have coordinators or stuff getting jobs at, we can say LSU is probably a better program. If you have, then something's going right at your program. So it's just the way the business is. But, I'm happy for him that he's going back home. And, of course, sad that he's going to leave.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. One of the things that BK always talked about when he was still at the show, all those many weeks ago that BK was still a regular on the show, he would always talk about, if you're a school like Mizzou, and obviously we want Mizzou to be more than what we've historically been as a program, but if you are a school like Mizzou, when your coordinators get poached by blue blood programs, and let's not get it twisted, LSU is a blue blood program. Mizzou wants to be LSU kids. Mizzou had its best season. Mizzou had one of its 5 best seasons ever, and they lost to LSU, right? So even if the final record swung Mizzou's way, if your coach is getting poached by a school like that, and they're paying him the most money that any assistant coach is being paid in the country, you're doing something right. He has left the position better than when he found it. And you pointed out, obviously, that Steve Wilkes, who's obviously doing great things in the NFL right now, had a 97.
Chargers, I think.
Yeah, I hope he gets it, man. He's a really good defensive coach in the NFL, but like you pointed out, it just didn't work on the college level. I want to say the year that he was here, Mizzou had the 97th SP Plus ranked defense. Blake Baker comes in 19th and 14th. It just immediately it turns into one of the nation's elite units. And obviously recruiting had a lot to do with that in the job that Eli Drinkwitz did laying the foundation. But Blake Baker took that talent and molded it into something really special.
Oh, yeah.
But obviously one of the things that comes from losing a coordinator is you're going to see some ripple effects. That's the first thing that I thought of whenever it was kind of announced that he's going to take this job. I'm like, all right, who else is Mizzou going to lose? Because what's going to happen. There's probably going to be an assistant or two that follows him. This is really what people don't want to hear. It may or may not happen this year or next offseason. Players might be following him there. He's obviously built a lot of really good relationships with the players, and they really like him. What would you anticipate the ripple effects being from Blake Baker moving
on? Well, if any were to happen, I think you would have to first look at the secondary. I believe Marcus Clark, he played with them at Miami, didn't he? Is Marcus Clark, he's supposed to come back another year. I believe he played with them at Miami, but, he was the safeties coach. So that's something that you're going to have to watch out for. I remember he did a lot of work with them. As a position coach, he did a lot of work with them over the summer. I remember watching, and, he's helped make some good safeties. And Missouri has a lot of young secondary defensive talent. So that was one thing that I thought of within a ripple effect. Now, when it comes in terms of assistants, I was looking to see, does Mizzou have any other assistants from, that Louisiana area? I know Kevin Peoples was there, the D-line coach, if I'm not mistaken. He was there at Tulane in 2019, but I don't think their paths crossed at all. Blake Baker's a Tulane alum. But I don't really know within the coaching staff, but, within that defense, within – the secondary position that he coached. It'll be interesting to watch. I don't know if any players more players are planning to leave, but that's what I thought of when thinking about what ripple effects could happen within, the roster and the staff.
Yeah. I mean, there's been some rumors that our staff has heard that Kevin Peoples might be one of those coaches that Blake Baker is bringing on. It's interesting that you mentioned him. I think that would be a big loss for Mizzou. He brought in last year, Drinkwitz did, to kind of work on the defensive line. Obviously, the defensive line was a huge part of the defense's success this year. The fact that they were able to build up so much high quality depth, rotate bodies in and out. They've got several guys who are NFL quality, and Peoples was able to coach them up specifically on the edge is what he was looking at. And now that's not a given. We don't have anything concrete. It's just something that we've heard as a staff. I don't know that. I think the players I'm a little less worried about that. You mentioned Marcus Clark. He would have to sit out another year, I believe, if he were to transfer to LSU and follow Baker there, since that he transferred to Mizzou already. One person that I thought of immediately was Trayan Greco. We'll talk about him a little bit. Just signed with Mizzou earlier this week. I know that's not what people want to hear. The 4-star top 250 safety that just signed with Mizzou. Is he going to transfer next season? But Blake Baker was his primary recruiter. Greco kind of had an ominous tweet the night that the news dropped. It was the day before he signed. I don't want to push the kid out the door. Obviously, I'd love to have him have a great career at Mizzou, but he's someone I thought of. I just want people to be aware that when you lose someone as high profile as Blake Baker, it's usually not just the main impact. Usually there are other smaller impacts that happen after the fact.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And especially the people that he recruits. He's the guy out there recruiting and bringing people in. And if he builds a good relationship with them, that's just sports. They will probably follow. And if Greco gets here and he's like, kind of miss Blake Baker, he hasn't played under him and he wants to go play with him, knows him, he's built a relationship to him. You can't really be mad at a young kid going in doing that. But, that's interesting that with Kevin Peoples that, that's kind of something that's, I don't know, been speculated, rumored, but that's something I would watch out. Because that D-line, it's losing a lot of pieces. And, you're really going to need a good coach, because he's a good coach that'll transform that defensive line. You're going to need that for another year, especially coming up in 2024.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's going to be on Drinkwitz to make sure that the kind of the secondary impacts from Baker leaving are minimized for sure. I guess my final question on this point on Blake Baker leaving, before we go to start talking about his potential replacements, and then we're going to talk about recruiting tonight. We'll talk about kind of continued portal activity. We've got to say goodbye to a few guys who've declared for the draft and welcome back another player who's coming back for another year. How does Blake Baker leaving affect your expectations for the 2024 football season?
I gave this a good – I was thinking about this for a while, but after thinking about it, my expectations for this team hasn't really changed from what I thought going into 2024 after the Cotton Bowl, because first of all, the schedule that, is presented to you next year, the toughest game is what? I mean, the non-conference schedule isn't really tough at all. You get Alabama, that's your toughest game on the road. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you get Oklahoma and Auburn at home. I think you got to go to South Carolina, then you get Arkansas at home. So the schedule really, it sets up for you well.
They're going to College Station too. I think that's worth
okay.
Pointing
you got to go
out.
and that's not a gimme.
Yeah,
that's not a gimme. But the expectation for this team, I don't think it should change of trying to be a top 15, 12 team and getting into the playoffs. Schedule sets up easy. Your offense is still pretty much in terms of offensive firepower intact. You bring back Kirby Moore, and I also thought about when Dave Steckel left in 2014, I believe, 2013, 2014. And then they brought in Barry Odom, and defense didn't miss a beat then at all. Expect 2015, that season, the offense was not fun to watch. I remember that season quite well, but the defense was probably the best. It's probably the best defense this century, maybe. But I remember him leaving. Then I thought about this also with when Josh Heupel left, and Mizzou played a tougher schedule in 2018. They brought in Derek Dooley, but the offense still, it wasn't bad at all, playing a tougher schedule. So it doesn't really change my expectations for 2024. I don't think Blake Baker leaving is going to cause a huge difference in between like winning 9 to 10, 11 games and possibly falling all the way back down to 7. So of course it's going to be, you have a new play caller in there, but I don't think it's going to have as much big of impact as, some people might think it might happen, but I don't think it's going to be that bad at all.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about the offense and how that plays into people's expectations. I think really what we can expect is the offense. Yeah, I know they're losing Cody Schrader, consensus All-American. I'm not putting a damper on that. They're losing some key offensive line pieces. They're also bringing in 2 really good running backs out of the portal. They got Caden Green. You're returning pretty much all of your receivers, and you're bringing in more talented receivers. You've got your quarterback for another year. The offense should be improved, as hard as that is to believe. And the defense, I think one thing that I thought about whenever the season was over was that Blake Baker spent 2 years building this specific defense, the one that we just spent time watching. And think about all the pieces that they're leaving. I mean, we're going to talk about it. Both of your linebackers are gone. Your starting linebackers to begin the season. Both of your starting corners. Probably your best overall safety. Your best overall defensive linemen. Pretty much all of your defensive tackles are gone. You're losing a lot of pieces. So at the very least, what was going to happen next year was going to be regression, right? Even with Blake Baker, that defense was not going to be what it was this year. Now what you're doing, introducing a new defensive coordinator in, there's almost this natural transition point there to where, are you going to be as good as you were if Baker was still here? Probably not, but I think the difference is minimal, because what you're doing is you're taking pretty much a new set of guys and you're allowing them to adapt to a new voice. Certainly a lot of the guys that are going to be playing on the defense next year played for Baker, whether that's like Drayden Norwood or Tristan Newson or Chuck Hicks, or a lot of the guys that were on the line. But you're allowing them to kind of step into this new role as the guys on defense. And then they've got kind of a new general to follow. So I think that natural transition point kind of smooths it a little bit, but obviously who they choose is going to play a big part of it as well. And I think that's where I want to go next is let's talk about who could potentially replace Blake Baker. I think the thought that we have is that Drinkwitz will want to wrap this up pretty quick. There's still holes to fill in the defense in the portal, and it's hard to recruit whenever you don't know who you're going to be playing for. Obviously, I think the night that it was announced that Baker was going to be leaving, one of the first news bits that hit the wire was that DJ Smith, the co-defensive coordinator, the linebackers coach, the director of recruiting, was going to be a top name in the search, although Drinkwitz said that they were going to search nationally. Let's just start with Smith right away. When I think about it, it almost seems too easy to think that Smith is going to be the guy. He literally got the co-defensive coordinator title added when Baker was brought on to be the DC. He's been with Drinkwitz since App State. He's added all these titles, linebacker coach. He mentored Nick Bolton. That was a big part of what he was doing when he came here, is he coached up Nick Bolton and turned him into really the NFL star he is now. He's one of the big recruiters on that staff. Does it make just kind of too much sense to just be like, hey, DJ, you're the guy. We're taking the off your title. You get a bigger office. Here's a pay raise. Go get him, champ. Or is that just kind of, is it, what is it? What's the law of like the simplest explanation is always the best explanation? I'm losing my lexicon here, but
I feel like first of all, I feel like that should be your number one choice right now. I feel like it's just natural to promote him. I mean, like you said, he was the co-defensive coordinator. He's heavily involved in recruiting, and he's been within this program since Drinkwitz arrived in 2020. So I think that's the most natural transition you can make. I don't feel like there's I don't know if this is the right way to say it. I don't know if there's a very low floor if you do promote him. I mean, he knows the guys. He knows the guys in the locker room. The guys in the locker room, they probably love him. And like you said, from his body of work, especially at the linebacker position, Nick Bolton, Tyron Hopper, the linebackers have been, good these past few years. I just feel like that's the best choice you can make, and you're not really, I don't want to say like disrupting things. I don't know if that's the right word to use also, but you're kind of keeping kind of some of the same things within place just by promoting DJ Smith. And, he's been co-defensive coordinator, linebackers coach. In a way, he's kind of earned it. He's kind of earned to have that code thing taken off of him and just be the full-time defensive coordinator. That's my number one pick. I would say it's more of like kind of a known I would say known commodity. Is that the right word? Because he's
a known quantity.
He's a known commodity. And it seems natural.
Yeah, I think the question of if you promote DJ Smith, I think it comes down to what you value in this hire, right? So here are the pros to promoting DJ Smith. Obviously, I think it gives a sense to anybody who would want to come work for Drinkwitz, like, look, this guy stayed loyal to Drinkwitz. He's been with him for 5 years. He got consistently promoted. And when the time came for the big gig, even though he's never been the guy to call plays, even though, like Drinkwitz said, you know what, you've earned it. You get the chance. That looks good to other coaches and other grad assistants who want to come for Drinkwitz to say, hey, if you stick with him, he will give you the opportunity to do the big thing on the big stage. So that looks good. Obviously, he's got familiarity with the program and the culture and the roster as it is. You never want to hire a defensive coordinator just to keep players around because that's short-sighted, as Nate Edwards would say. But it also makes a lot of sense. He would be able to continue probably a lot of the things that the defense was already doing and then maybe introduce some other wrinkles of his own. I'm sure he's got some different ideas he'd love to factor into. The other thing to say, too, is if you don't promote DJ Smith, you likely lose him. I don't want to assume that, but if you give a guy the co-defensive coordinator role, that's his title, and then when the full title comes available and you're like, actually, we're going to go a different direction, you probably don't get him back. And I think it's a matter of, do you value what he brings to the table overall, including his title as the director of recruiting? That's his title. So that's a big title. Yeah. So are you willing to lose what he brings in recruiting to get someone better to run the defense? I don't know. I just think that's something you have to consider if you're Eli Drinkwitz and you're looking at your options here.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like you said, he's just been around the program. I think another thing is that if I'm Drinkwitz, I kind of want the players' opinion on this also, because I feel like, especially if you're trying to retain guys for their future, what do the players think? Who do they want to play under? What do they think? I think that's another thing. That's just my opinion that I thought of that should be taken into consideration too. And I think that's probably what's done in every locker room in college football. But I feel like that should be something that's heavily emphasized. And and this is a guy that's been with Drinkwitz. I just feel like that's probably what's most likely going to happen. But we'll see though. We'll see.
Yeah. So DJ Smith, I think, is obviously he's number one option for a lot of people. And I think you make a good case as to why. I think, honestly, if I had to think about my number one options, he might be tied for number one with the next guy on my list. He was the second guy that I wrote about whenever I put up the hot board the night that Baker announced that he was going to be leaving. And that's Jim Leonard, senior football analyst at the University of Illinois. A few things to note as we talk about Jim Leonard, as we're recording this, it has been reported by, I would say less reputable voices than maybe some of your national guys or like beat guys on either end, that Leonard is really looking at the Colorado defensive coordinator role. Certainly, Coach Prime needs some help on defense, and that would be a good fit for him. Another thing that I do want to point out, and this has actually happened since we started recording, Jaden, is that Alabama defensive coordinator Kevin Steele is retiring. So you've got a huge opening now in the SEC that Mizzou is probably, a lot of the guys that were looking at Mizzou as like one of the best openings now have someone else to consider. And certainly Alabama is going to have the pick of the litter when it comes to whoever they would. So whoever would be at the top of Mizzou's board, guarantee you they're on Alabama's board as well. It's just a matter of how much they're willing to pay. And so just another thing to consider. But Jim Leonard, I think, would be a fantastic hire if he decides not to go to Colorado, if Mizzou can come in, offer him a little bit more money. He's obviously got a lot of familiarity with the Midwest. He spent 5 seasons as Wisconsin's defensive coordinator, spent some time as their interim head coach. Pretty much every year he was there, they had a top 10 defense in the country, top 5 scoring defense on several occasions. I mean, if you're looking outside of this current staff and DJ Smith, I don't think there's a better option than Jim Leonard, is there?
No, not at all. And I remember Jim Leonard, was it the past coaching cycle or 2 coaching cycles ago? He was getting NFL interest. And if he did a phenomenal job at Wisconsin, I don't know, why they ended up letting him go, him or the other guy. I don't know. Because I've watched a lot of Gophers football, and I just didn't like playing them when they played Wisconsin. But, he's a fantastic defensive mind, and I feel like he's the number one option out there. He's just, like you said, he's just doing data or something. Where is he at? Where did you say he was at?
Illinois. He's at the University of Illinois. He's a senior football analyst. He was hired.
Okay.
Belima hired him last year, so he's been there for 2 years. I would imagine he's looking to move on.
Yeah, I would assume that he would want to be going to call plays. Now, Alabama, that is, of course, like you said, the top spot. That's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But when it comes down to Mizzou and Colorado, do you want to be calling defensive plays in the SEC? Do you want to be calling defensive plays in the Big 12? And I know playing with Deion Sanders and going out there to Boulder, that's a great job. But if they can make a move to get, if they can make a move to get Jim Leonard, if they don't promote DJ Smith, that would be a home run. That would be a home run hire for me, in my opinion. It's just a great defensive mind that he is. And like you said, the Midwest ties that he has was going to be great for the recruiting front as well.
Yeah. So Jim Leonard, I think, would be a great choice. Obviously, a huge track record of success. He's going to be in high demand. So I would say that the chances of Mizzou landing him are less today than they might have been a few days ago. Yeah. A few names that have also come up. One person in Reckham Nation's Twitter mentions the other day mentioned Andy Avalos. He's a guy that has been at Boise State for a little bit, has crossed paths with Drinkwitz. He's had some good defenses out there in Idaho, but he's also kind of waxed and waned with the amount of talent. I certainly don't think he would be a bad option. The guy from Virginia Tech, I'm having a hard time remembering his name. He's been mentioned as
Virginia Tech. They did all right this year, didn't they? Didn't they win a bowl?
Yeah. Well, they had a pretty good defense last year. But he's been mentioned as a guy. Chris Marv is his name. He's been at Virginia Tech for 2 years. Certainly, he'd have more resources here at the University of Missouri. Look, when I wrote the hot board, someone that I threw it out there kind of because I knew it would get a reaction. Will Muschamp is currently a co-defensive coordinator at Georgia. Listen, I get it. Not the option you want, bringing in your head coach, but he coaches elite defenses. He's a great recruiter. I don't think you could pry him from Georgia because I think if Mizzou came sniffing, Georgia would probably just promote him or give him more money than Mizzou could.
And they can do that.
Plan to offer. So, I mean, not the worst option. Personally, one person that I am really interested in he's someone that's come up on a few boards other than just mine, is Jimmy Rogers out of South Dakota State. He has been with South Dakota State. Yeah, he's been with South Dakota State for the last 10 years. He spent one season there as their defensive coordinator. They had the best defense in the FCS. He's currently their head coach. And I want to say that they played the FCS national championship game. They were undefeated at the last time I checked. Yeah. So they played the national championship. Yes, they did one yesterday. They beat the Montana Grizzlies 23-3. So they are the FCS champions, undefeated. Once again, had the best defense in the FCS. Look, it's going to be hard to pry him away from there. He is part of that lineage. He just became their head coach. That's FCS royalty. Mm-hmm. If you go there, you could certainly up his salary and say, hey, man, you want a shot to do this at the big boy level? SEC is where it's at. I have no doubts that he has the coaching acumen to get it done. The recruiting might be where I think he would fall short, but the worst guys to work under on that front than Eli Drinkwitz. So I think personally, DJ Smith and Jim Leonard would be my tied for number one. And if you can't get either, I mean, obviously you could get DJ Smith. But if you want to look elsewhere, I think Jimmy Rogers would be a home run hire as well. Maybe not as flashy as Jim Leonard, but certainly I think he could get the job done.
Yep, and you said he's been there for 10 years. That's another Midwestern guy. He would say South Dakota. He would say is the Midwest. But yeah, I think, like I said, it's a tough business. If you throw some money at some guys an offer that they can't refuse, unless he just all South Dakota State, then it would be a good hire. Now, this was just kind of like a reckless one I thought of, and it would be interesting if Peoples leaves and ends up going to down at LSU. But you remember from the 2000s, Mizzou's D-line coach Coach K, remember him?
Oh my gosh, Coach Cool. Dang, man, you're bringing up Coach Cool. You are bound to get some people hot in the comments.
He's at Toledo right now. I think he's an assistant head coach in D-line or something like that. But that's just reckless. That's just me just throwing one out there. That's a fun one that I thought of. But he's at Toledo, I think, right now. And I think that's where he may have started. But I don't know if he will be open to coming back to Mizzou. I know he's the assistant head coach.
He's the assistant head coach and co-defensive coordinator and defensive line coach at Toledo right now. Listen, man, Coach Cool knows how to coach him to get after the quarterback. If we want to guarantee that the defensive line is going to get after the quarterback, Coach Cool would be the person to hire. I don't know how he would work with Eli Drinkwitz. You're going to have some real egos going on in that room. And Coach Cool is certainly a personality. If he would be open to coming back, if Peoples were to leave, or certainly I would take him back as a defensive line coach, defensive coordinator. I don't know, man. Drinkwitz is bold. So maybe it's something to look at. I certainly love that you brought him up for the comments that we're going to get. So you heard it there first. Jaden Lewis's outside the box pick is Coach Craig Kuligowski, bringing back some memories. But we've talked enough about the defensive coordinator. We're half hour into this thing. Let's talk about some good stuff. Let's talk about Cruton. Who loves talking about Cruton? Everybody. It's been a big week for Mizzou on the recruiting trail. Obviously, I mentioned a few minutes ago that Trey and Greco, 4-star safety, committed to Mizzou. And let me go ahead and start this conversation off by saying this. Greco signed his national letter of intent back on National Signing Day. And this was just kind of like he was announcing at the All-American game. So certainly he was committed to Mizzou, like on paper already. It's not unheard of for guys to ask out of their national letter of intent if the coach that brought them to the school leaves. So, and the thing is, whenever a guy asks you that, you say yes, right? You say, like, I'm going to do this. Now, it was the night before. I certainly don't think he probably had time to process that news. What I'm saying is, I don't want to make it sound like Greco's gone after this year, especially if he doesn't get playing time. He wants to be at Mizzou for more than just Blake Baker. There clearly is a reason he chose Mizzou over some good schools like USC. So I think it's really good news that Mizzou's getting him on campus. He's going to be I think he's going to have a shot at playing immediately. Maybe not like a starter, but some good depth minutes. He's got that talent. He's a top 250 guy. So great to get him on campus and get his commitment. Adds to a top 25 high school class. A few more transfer recruits committed to Mizzou this week. St. Louis native and former New Mexico State guy Sterling Webb. He saw action against Mizzou during his time in New Mexico. He had, I want to say, 6.5 sacks, including 4.5 this past season. Running back Nate Noel from Appalachian State. Eli Drinkwitz recruited him to go to Boone back when he was the head coach there. He rushed for over 3,000 yards in Appalachian State. And then earlier today, Mizzou added Harold Blood out of Southern University. He's a quarterback. They didn't tweet about it, so I imagine that's a preferred walk-on situation. Daniel Blood's brother, from what I understand. Jaden, how do you feel about these additions? You can choose one. You can choose the lot. How do you feel about the guys that Mizzou's brought in these last few days?
Okay, I'm gonna try to go through all of them. So what Greco is, I wonder if he knew, just to start off, I wonder if he knew that there was a possibility of, because I'm assuming he's probably been in contact with Blake Baker. I wonder if he knew that there was a possibility that he would possibly be leaving. But like you said, it's great for him to, stay committed to Mizzou. He's very talented on both sides of the ball. And, you talk about depth minutes. A lot of young Mizzou players, especially this past year, played a lot and stepped in and made some big plays. I wouldn't say played a lot, but they made some notable plays. And it'll be interesting to see if he can get in that mix too also, especially in the secondary. D tackle, the D-line transfer, that's an area that you're going to really need to fill because you're losing a lot there. And the running back from Appalachian State, that's what I'm really fascinated with because, of course, you're losing Cody Schrader. You're losing my guy, Nate Pete. So you're losing your 1 and 2 running backs. You got Marcus Carroll and, watching Noel. The guy's pretty fast. And so you got to have two good veteran running backs in the backfield. And, that really helps the run game out, especially with the talent that you're losing. So that's what I'm more fascinated about. You kind of have a 1-2 punch there with Carroll and Noel. And, that should be fun to watch, especially with Kirby Moore in that offense and Kirby Moore returning as well. So that's going to be very fun to watch. You have 2 veteran running backs that played at the FBS level coming in here.
Yeah, I think you summed up pretty well. It's hard to talk about Greco too much just because he's a high school guy. We don't know exactly where he's going to fit in. Ideally, he steps up and plays immediate minutes and becomes a guy that's with you for 4 years. Sterling Webb obviously is going to be one of those many defensive line guys that are brought in. Already brought in quite a few. We're going to shuffle in lots of bodies, continue that strategy of getting people in, making sure everybody's fresh all the time. I do think Nate Noel is the most interesting person they brought in this week, mostly because when Marcus Carroll committed back at the beginning of the portal cycle, I think everybody assumed, that's the next Cody Schrader. That's the guy. If you look at their numbers, Carroll's had 1 good year at Georgia, State or Southern?
State.
I think it was State.
I think it's State.
Georgia State. My bad. Nate Noel has done it for 4 years at Appalachian State. Yeah. Every single year, he has been a dude there. I think he's a top 10 rusher for them all time. He's got 18 touchdowns. He's averaged 5.7 yards a carry, or yards per carry at Appalachian State. And, you might say, oh, well, that's a Sun Belt program. Look, App State plays some teams. He rushed for 127 yards, 2 touchdowns against North Carolina earlier this year. This guy knows how to do it on the big stage, and they're pretty different guys. They're different types of runners. Marcus Carroll's much more like Cody Schrader. Maybe he lacks that top end speed, but he's an explosive runner, can hit holes, makes decisions quickly. Nate Noel's just a burner, man. You watch him run, he's like Tyler Beatty. You're like, holy crap, that guy can move. So I'm really interested to see where it goes starting, I assume starting in the spring. Obviously, the ideal that everybody has is like, oh, you need 2 running backs. But I think that's left over from the Gary Pinkel days, as Nate and BK have said a lot. Like, Drinkwitz picks one guy and he runs him into the ground. And you've got 2 really, really good options in Noel and Carroll. I think that personally is probably the most fascinating competition immediately this offseason. who becomes the next Tyler Beatty, the next Larry Roundtree, the next Cody Schrader, because it's going to be one of those two guys, or it might be someone like Tavoris Jones. So that running back battle is wide open. There's a lot of really talented players going for it.
Yep, and it is going to be wide open. I thought it was interesting that you said, like, during the Pinkel years, we did see a lot of three-headed monsters, three different running backs rotating in there. But that is something. Drinkwitz, they kind of just use one running back and they stick to it. That's what they've done. But they're two, like you said, they're two very different running backs. And I would like to see two different running backs used because it's versatile. It brings different problems for defensive coordinators to plan for. So I would like to see that. We'll see. Because Kirby Moore, he's year one. He's still kind of a fresh mind within this program to see how they utilize them more. But that running back competition is going to be fascinating because you're losing two big veterans over these past couple of years. But it's fun to see new faces come in, especially ones where you look at what they've done and they come in, you're like, wow, this could be something. It could go left, it could go right. We don't know, but it's going to be something fun to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously the portal is it's not open right now, but there is a shorter portal window that's going to open later this spring after spring ball. Certainly, we're going to see more guys from Mizzou enter there. Guys who maybe didn't have great springs aren't in line for more playing time coming up this next season. But you certainly can bring more people in during that time. More guys can enter from other schools, obviously. And we know Mizzou is still recruiting the portal. Isaiah Hastings, defensive tackle transfer from Alabama. He's going to have 4 years of eligibility. He tweeted today that Mizzou is kind of he didn't say this, but he put a picture of Mizzou, Syracuse, Illinois, and one other school. I can't remember which. He's obviously was recruited to Alabama out of high school, was a 4-star recruit there. He's a 3-star transfer recruit right now. Look, I am super interested whenever I can get a guy that got recruited by Alabama, because clearly there's some talent there. The question I have for you, Jaden, is if there's one position that you want the staff to still be hitting hard in the portal, what is it?
That's an interesting one. The secondary, it's young, but I think they're going to be. I feel like there's a lot of young players in it, but I feel like they're going to be talented. I'm a big trenches guy. You're losing Foster and Delgado, and I know you got whatchamacallit from Oklahoma. Sorry, I forgot. I forgot his name,
Green.
But you've got Caden Green. Yeah, you got
biggest recruit Mizzou's got this offseason. You forgot him.
Yeah, I apologize, Mizzou fans, but that left side of the offensive line, I would like that, short up just to have some more confidence in there. And then, of course, beefing up the interior defensive line with all the names that you've lost all over. So, the trenches is where I would love to have depth and just kind of build up. That's where I feel like, this team can still add some pieces. And that's in my opinion, personally.
No, yeah, and I agree with you. I think the secondary, certainly, if there are any really talented guys out there that want to give Mizzou a look, certainly I don't think they could use some additional help in the secondary. But I agree with you. There's a lot of young talent there. You're bringing in Toriano Pride. He immediately slots into one of those starting corner positions. To me, it's the offensive line, personally. I think you've got a lot of good young defensive tackles and ends, and you got some guys coming back. They've obviously already brought in a few. They need some more bodies on that offensive line. I know Caden Green's a big get. 4 of those 5 spots are probably sewn up at this point, but I would really rather them continue to bring in guys. I think the more depth they can have there, the better, because what that's going to do is that's going to elevate someone into that 5th spot. So I would love to see them continue adding guys from the offensive line. And what we'll end this recruiting conversation with, kind of an adjacent to recruiting conversation, but personally to me, I think you could argue is the biggest addition to next year's roster, and that is keeping someone around. Theo Wease Jr. is coming back. This feels like forever ago that this happened, but it happened the day after the last recording, which was only 5 days ago or 5 or 6 days ago that the last episode of the show dropped. And the next day, Theo Wease announced that he was coming back. It had been rumored for a long time. Obviously, a lot of news has come and gone since then. So it feels like oh yeah, that's old hat. But I mean, Theo Wease come back. That's a big deal. That's a big, big deal that they're going to have pretty much their entire receiver room back for Brady Cook next year.
Oh, that it's huge. And in college football, just in football in general, you need more than just one good receiver. Theo Wease is a good receiver, and where he's come, he exceeded what I thought he was going to do this year, in my opinion. But he's just been a solid number 2 receiver. Luther Burden's number 1 receiver, and then Theo Wease. It's not only on the field, but he has been a big leader off the field as well. Like that's going to be good for a locker room with just his experience, his age, him coming back. It's really going to rub off on a lot of young receivers within that locker room. Mizzou's receiver room, it is very talented, and they got a lot of players that are going to be great future Tigers. But just him on the field, what he's able to do, especially down there in the red zone as well, it's very good for this team. And you just have another leader in that offense, along with guys like Brady Cook, Luther Burden coming back. And so it goes a long way, for your football team just to have someone like that back in that locker room on that offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the opportunity for Wease to mentor guys like Courtney Crutchfield and Joshua Manning and Mekhi Miller and James Madison.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, man. The fact that you're going to have Theo Wease around to mentor, so him and Luther Burden, a pair of blue chip 5-star receiver recruits, being the stars of one of the nation's best defenses, looking down at these young guys and being like, this is what it's about. This is how you get to where we are right now. That's going to be so good for that offensive room. So I'm really excied to have him back.
And Mookie Cooper.
Before we
I know that's a big one.
Yeah. Yeah. Mookie Cooper, I think, to me, having that three-headed monster of Burden in the slot, just making dudes miss, Wease running the sidelines and being a red zone target, and Mookie Cooper being like Barrett Bannister, but like he has that a few extra routes in his tree that Barrett Bannister didn't have. That's going to be immense to have those guys around. You add Brett Norfleet into that conversation, all those talented receivers. Marquise Johnson's going to be back for another year.
He's so good.
I would probably put Mizzou's receiver room up against anyone else in the country next year.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But we're coming up on time, Jaden. Before we wrap up, just wanted to cap this episode by saying happy trails to a few of our favorite Mizzou Tigers. A few guys have announced that they are not going to be returning next year. Some have exhausted their eligibility, but several had maybe one more year to play. Niles Gaddy is headed to the NFL. Jaden Jernigan, Tyron Hopper, Harrison Mevis, Chris Abrams-Drain, Chad Bailey. Out of all these guys, who are you going to miss watching play the most?
Oh, I can't say all of them. I can't say all of them, but all of them.
Well, give me. Yeah. Let's go ahead and say all of them.
It takes a full team effort, but Tyron Hopper is such a good player. He's such a good linebacker. He flies around, makes plays. We're all, of course, going to miss thicker kicker Harrison Mavis, and just him possibly becoming the best kicker in Mizzou history with just the amount of big game kicks that he's made. Chris Abrams-Drain, it was fun to watch him and Ennis on both sides. Man, that's just 2 talented corners out there as well. And then on the defensive side, you're just losing a lot of guys that just come in like Niles Gaddy, just rotates in and just comes in and makes plays and provides stops on third downs, getting sacks and stuff. It's just always fun to watch. So I mean, just to lose a lot of guys that made big plays, that's who you're going to miss next year. But it's football. It's new beginnings every year. Roster turnover, that stuff happens. But going to miss these guys. It made it a very, very special season, and one that kind of rejuvenated this program, because it seems like this program's kind of been in not what it once was for like a decade, and they kind of got Mizzou, put some pride back into Mizzou football, which is great for the university and the state of Missouri.
Yeah, one other person I wanted to throw on that list, Realis George Jr., also going to be taken off. I think you really said it best. It takes an effort, a team effort. Obviously, Mizzou is going to miss Tyron Hopper. Obviously, they're going to miss Chris Abrams-Drain, an All-American cornerback. Obviously, Harrison Mevis. You can't replace the leading scorer in school history. And I will take this opportunity to say too, because he never does it himself. Thicker kicker. The original nickname, the Thicker, came from Nate Edwards on Rock M Nation. No one's ever going to give him credit for that. But he was the first person to say, that's our Thicker. And then everybody else ran with it. And, that's why Nate's the best in the business. But yeah, I think really when I look back on this season 10 years from now, one of the things that I'm going to remember the most is that defensive line and just how many guys chipped in. If it wasn't Jaden Jernigan, it was Realis George Jr. If it wasn't Johnny Walker, it was Niles Gaddy. If it wasn't Darius Robinson, it was someone else coming in and just wrecking shop. Every single one of those guys played at their level all season. And I think it culminated in that game at Ohio State when they were just blowing up Ohio State's offensive line all night. And I mean, personally, I think that might be where we see the biggest drop off in the defense next year is on that line, because it's going to be hard to replace all of those guys. Josh Landry, there's another one that just came to my head. You're just going to have to replace so many bodies, and not just bodies, just guys that had that high level of intensity and talent. Drinkwitz and Baker did a good job of bringing so many guys in that I think other schools saw as, you're not going to be the star we thought you were going to be. So you just go somewhere else. And Drink was like, hey, you can play a job on this defense. And they together were bigger than the sum of their parts. And I really think Mizzou is going to miss that next year. And I think we're going to miss watching all those guys come in. It's going to be hard to say bye to them. But yeah, anyway, so that's going to be our show for tonight. Unless, Jaden, do you have any final thoughts?
Not off the top of my head, I do not.
Sounds good, man. Well, that's going to be our show for today. As always, we really appreciate the downloads and subscriptions to Rock M Radio's Before the Box Score podcast. We especially appreciate the reviews with 5 stars, but as Nate always says, we appreciate all types of feedback that y'all give us. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm Josh Matejka. That's Jaden_Lewis 29. Jaden and Parker are continuing to cover basketball teams, so make sure that you're following all their work on Rock M Nation. Jaden will also continue to be watching football for us as we head towards spring ball and into the off season. You can obviously also follow our flagship at Rock M Nation and our podcast outlet at Rock M Radio. We appreciate you tuning in this time. We'll try to be better next time. And as always, MIZ.
Feel you.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, just click the subscribe button below. And you can find this podcast through the Apple Podcast app or for iPhone, or the Google Podcast app for Android, or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. We are also available on Spotify. Just search for Rock M Radio. And if you like other sports, Fans First Sports Network is a podcast network that has coverage of all other teams, Major League Baseball, MLS, NFL, whatever you want to listen and read about. It is a great network full of really fantastic podcasts. So look them up and subscribe to any and all of those podcasts. Rock M Radio will be back with more episodes coming soon. Thanks.